Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. Welcome to the last day of JNUC, the first session. Wah, wah, wah. In case you're lost, this is the Greenway Ballroom. If that's not where you intended to be, you can wander where you were going instead. The first session today is entitled CIS plus STIG plus NIST plus Apple plus users equals X. I'm not sure what all those acronyms mean, so I'm excited to find out, just like you. Our presenter today is Erin McDonald. She is a professional services engineer at Jamf. When on-site helping organizations succeed with Apple, if there is a zoo, Erin will be at that zoo and likely captivated by otters. She told me the otter is her spirit animal. So, all right, she's going to tell us about the security benchmarks, those acronyms that I mentioned. Take it away, Erin.
Good morning, everybody. So, as we already found out, my name is Erin McDonald. I am a senior professional services engineer here at Jamf. And we are here to talk about that math equation. So, just an overview as to what we're going to be going through. We're going to talk about all of those variables in there, where they intersect, where they tend to agree with things, where they disagree, and how we can deploy to solve for that last X. So, before we start out, a little bit of story. Way back in high school, I decided I was going to take advanced math. It seemed like a good idea because I was doing well in math, but unfortunately, the very first day, the teacher comes out and says, 1 plus 1 equals 2, but 1 plus 1 can also equal 3, and then proceeded to show this. And at that point, I just flipped the table and said, I'm done. There are no rules, nothing makes sense. But at the end of the day, what it basically boiled down to is that there are absolutely different ways at looking at things. There are ways that they can be interpreted and understood differently. And that's what we're going to have to think about as we're going through this. So, what we're talking about. For those who don't know, CIS stands for the Center for Internet Security, and they provide multiple security guidelines for multiple OSs. They're a nonprofit, and if we're looking for the benchmarks for Apple OS, that's the link over there. Just as a note, as of this keynote, the only publicly available CIS benchmarks for Apple are 10.13. 10.14 and 10.15 are currently in draft. Now, the STIG, for anybody who doesn't know, is short for Security Technical Implementation Guide. That is put out by DISA, which is part of the DoD. And what they do is they provide a secure guideline for securing devices within that governmental framework. So yesterday, NASA could likely fall into this bucket. They currently are on 10.14 for their publication. Now, NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They don't do just anything in regards to the cybersecurity or the InfoSec security. When I went to their webpage this morning, I saw that they had a publication about DNA as regards to crime or forensic crime scene hair samples. So there's other stuff there. That link is directly to get to NIST.gov, and that GitHub repo is what they have out for benchmarks for Mac OS. That publication is on 10.12. Now, for our discussion today, we're not going to consider everything that NIST has to offer there. We're going to focus solely on what they consider for password and cryptography. So, where everybody tends to agree as far as CIS and the STIG. They agree that you absolutely should be encrypting devices, and system integrity protection should be on. We should have screensaver settings that kick in after a certain point in time. We need a login window banner. The STIG is very, very precise as to what it needs to say. CIS just put things. We also need to have firewall logging turned on, as well as that display login window, as opposed to the icons that one could click and select. We need to have a name and a password field. We're going to disable certain services such as file sharing, Bonjour, internet sharing. As macOS continues to evolve, there might be more guidelines in regards to caching, maybe media sharing within iTunes. We are disabling root access, and we're enabling audit logging and making sure that those log folders that are storing those audit logs have the appropriate permissions, that I, as an end user, can't get in there and change certain things. And they agree, we're going to disable auto login. We need to require a password after sleep. We're going to disable remote Apple events and enable Gatekeeper. That's a lot of stuff that they all agree on. Unfortunately, there are different points in the conversation. Now, the STIG, due to its need to secure government secrets, is always going to go a step beyond. CIS makes no mention of these topics here. For example, CIS, we're not disabling Wi-Fi, but for the STIG, we must. We're also going to disable certain IPv4 and IPv6 protocols, ICPM settings. We're going to disable any unused network devices. So if I have unused Thunderbolt adapter, that's going to be disabled. They also remove temporary and emergency counts after 72 hours, and they're disabling FaceTime and messages. They also are not fans of iCloud. Anything iCloud is disabled. We're only going to enable specific SSH settings, mostly to allow remote administrators to get into these devices for any sort of forensic or administrative tools. They're disabling those iTunes file sharing and requiring that we are using smart cards for authentication. But we're not done. We also need to disable location services. Think back to, I think it was a couple of years ago when there was an article that was published saying that Fitbit was kind of broadcasting where people were going on runs on Army bases. So there's a reason to turn off those location services. Updates have to come from a DoD server. We're also installing antivirus and network scanning tools. CIS does not discuss any of that. And they need real-time alerts for any audit failures. Now, in that equation, as we're going along, Apple has really given us some help as far as security goes. That particular link that is up there is everything in regards to ports and hosts and proxy support for any of Apple's services. It is really in-depth and very handy if you've ever had any challenges trying to get push notifications to work, or VPP, or automated device enrollment. That's your article to look at. Also, they've released information as far as certification updates. That article is discussing everything in regards to the SEP, the secure key, SEP, the secure enclave processor, which is in regards to hardware encryption, data protection, file vault, that data and rest, as well as all of the T2 chip features, secure boot, firmware and OS trust integrity, and controls of the camera. August 1st this year, Apple got their ISO certs for the push notification service. That was a really big deal. We've also got that same ISO cert for Apple Business Manager and Apple Business Chat services. Prior to that, they had also gotten ISO certs for iMessages, the Apple School Manager instances, others, but this one was a very big deal. And if anybody within your organization has any questions about these certification updates, those two links are going to outline everything in regards to both macOS and iOS. So NIST, in regards to their passwords, they have made some really nice changes, in my personal opinion, in regards to what passwords should be. There was a point in time where it was a mix of uppercase, lowercase, special characters, this ungodly soup of things, and they've narrowed it down to things that are going to make it easier for the people who have to use those passwords on a day-to-day basis, so that we are not stuck with people with Post-it notes across creation, or an email that is inside of your inbox that has every password that you need to use for every service. So, their guidelines in a very TLDR are, we need an 8-character minimum if a human is going to set it, 6 minimum if it's a system or service. We need to support at least 64 characters for that maximum length. You can go over, but at the very maximum, we have to at least let them go to 64. And all ASCII characters, including the space, need to be respected. STIG and CIS say that the minimum for that human set needs to be 15. We are also not truncating that password. We are checking to see if the chosen password is within any of the known password dictionaries. So, for example, really super easy, is the password password? Allow for at least 10 password attempts before we're locking out, and no complexity requirements. CIS, they are unscoring the benchmark for the password complexity, but for the STIG, that is required. The big one is that no password expiration. NIST is saying that the only time that you should change a password is if it is known to be compromised. CIS is giving us some more room. They're saying 365 days or a year from set. The STIG says 60 days, which is better than it could have been. It could have been 30. We're not doing any password hints. We're not doing any knowledge-based authentication. You know, who's your best friend from high school? What was the name of your first pet that died? Things like that. We're also not using SMS for any two-factor auth. So something like Google Authenticator, Duo, the MFA that's included within Azure. Here are the links for NIST guidelines, and if you don't feel like reading the whole thing, which I do not blame you, they have an FAQ to break it all down. Now, let's talk about users. The harder we make it for them, the worse it's going to be. And as we need to increase our security, it gets a little bit tougher. And honestly, after a certain point in time, whatever's on the other side of that door probably isn't going to be worth it, or we're just going to find another way around. So when we're going through this, we need to think about the people who are using our devices. We absolutely want them to be secure. Nobody wants to be part of any sort of security breach. How embarrassing would it be to be the one that happens to? But at the same time, we don't want to put them to a point where they feel like jumping the gate. So, if your organization has specific requirements that you must follow the STIG, then our decision here is easy. We need to follow what is outlined within the STIG. If we are set that we have to follow the CIS benchmarks to the letter, then absolutely do that. But if we don't have anything set, this could be an opportunity to take a look at what both of those publications have available to us and determine what's going to fit. So, reading through these documents, the CIS benchmarks are provided in a PDF. The STIG is provided in multiple formats that can be read using a tool called stigviewer.jar. It makes it really easy to search through all of those particular STIG benchmarks and build out your compliancy benchmark checkboxes. Once you've figured out what you want to do, audit. Find out what your organization is at, because deploying out everything immediately without knowing what is going on is a recipe for disaster. After that, find an amenable group of, we'll call them canaries in the coal mine, individuals who are completely fine with you doing horrible things to their devices. remediate against them, and determine what the end result is. Do they have a device that is both secure and able to help them get through their workday? After we've gotten through this, the important thing to keep our users in this equation is to communicate those expectations. Things are going to change. If we change that login window as opposed to the tennis ball that I see every day to text box for my name and password, I should know about this. Otherwise, I might send you a ticket freaking out for no good reason. So, everybody drink. Jamf Protect has the ability to audit. Absolutely. So, Jamf Protect allows us to audit against those CIS benchmarks. We also have the ability to go out to Jamf's GitHub repo. There is the CIS audit and remediation workflows out there. We currently are on 10.13. Once CIS publishes for 10.14 and 10.15, we'll update that. This is new as of last night. We also have the benchmarks and audit and remediation for the STIG for 10.13. So, this is Donut the Cat. Donut the Cat wants everything. And maybe we've determined that, okay, I like what CIS has, I like what the STIG has, I want both. You can take both of those repos and blend them together into one policy, wherein I'm doing the audit for the CIS benchmarks, remediation, then the audit for the STIG and the remediation, but we have to be thoughtful. If we're going where they intersect, where they both agree that the login window needs to be set with that username and password, set it in one of those particular scripted workflows. Don't set it in the other. Some things don't do well with being run twice. And that is all I have. So, thank you everybody for listening today.
Testing. All right. Thank you, Aaron. We have some time for questions if anybody has any.
One way over there.
Oh.
That way.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. And thank you for the CIS script that Jamf, put on GitHub, and constant updates helps us a lot. Now, did you say it's updated to 10.14, or it's still, because CIS hasn't released 10.14 out yet, right? So.
Absolutely correct. So as of right now, 10.14 and 10.15 are in draft, and I can't release anything until they put it out publicly. So once it's public, then we can start working on getting the updates for 10.14. In regards to running the 10.13 benchmarks on 10.14, things have absolutely changed. For example, one of the benchmarks within CIS is that we do not want to automatically open safe downloads within Safari. The setting for the audit and the remediation for 10.13 absolutely works on 10.13. 10.14, they moved that particular file to the BIOS files, so it's not going to work. So your mileage absolutely will vary with anything 10.14 or later for some of these benchmarks. I've had people who have run against it and have done okay, but just understand things change.
Yeah, and what's your recommendation? Is it you revamp it and then flush it out and put the new one out, or will there be conflicts by maintaining the 10.13 benchmarks, and then when the 10.14 comes out, put that overlaying on the existing ones? Because once you do it, you cannot undo this, right? It's very difficult to undo it.
It's definitely a very difficult bell to unring. The workflow that we have out on GitHub for CIS and the STIG have two different particular components. One is a scripted component to set certain things, and the other component is configuration profiles. So in the sense where if I can set it with a configuration profile, that's what I'm going to do. Anything that is scripted that is going through is stuff that I can't set or audit as against a configuration profile. If we're looking at an environment that has multiple different OSs, what I would recommend is to use the STIG that is set for that OS against that OS. So I would, for example, target the 1013 to any 1013 devices. And then once we get to 1014, target the 1014 to the 1014 devices. So I'm setting everything appropriately as well as auditing correctly.
One last question. Going from 1013 to 1014 to 1015 now, if you catch any change or any conflicts, will you put something out on the scripting side as per the Jamf script, or we have to pick that up? Because if you're not flushing the old ones out, right, when the new OS comes and if there's a conflict causing issues, now we got to figure out how to undo this.
I could be confused about the question, so let me see if I'm going to answer it correctly. If, for example, I have been running the benchmarks against the 1013 OS version, and then I upgrade to 1014,
Exactly. Yep.
what I've found in that scenario is that things that I have set in 1013 are typically persistent up to 1014. And once we go through the workflow, if I'm auditing against what is able to be audited on 1014, then I don't need to remediate against it. So if I'm okay in 1013 and then I move up to 1014, the audit should come back and say, I'm still good in 1014. I don't need to remediate against that. If you do find any issues with anything, please put an issue out on GitHub. I can't fix what I don't know.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Has Jamf thought about doing like their own benchmark, since obviously Jamf is very Mac focused and all these other organizations are not so Mac focused, so that way it would come out, faster?
We've thought about it. I don't know as far as how we've gotten beyond the thought process. I really could not answer that question, unfortunately. I am sorry.
No. The other thing is, what about like sort of a STIG importer kind of thing? Since you have the auditing, but now there needs to be an easy way to, upload all of the fixes or whatever.
So I have a coworker who is currently working on something like that. He had built out a way that said, I want to do all the stuff for CIS. I just check a box and then everything gets set without a scope. I do not know where that project is at, but it definitely could be a thing. And by all means, reach out if we think that this is a good idea.
Thank you so much for this. This is super helpful. I think we do feel a little bit like we're wandering in the weeds on the Mac side of the house with all those acronyms, so much appreciated. Just wanted to clarify that Strava was actually who was kind of leaking all of that information, not Fitbit. It was by way of Fitbit. Strava should own more of that.
Thank you.
So I've looked at that project quite a bit and been happy to actually going to implement a lot of that next year. But since we have unique things in our environment we want to add to it, I've always kind of made an assumption that the script seems modular enough that we can kind of add in our own additional checks kind of in there and customize. That would be correct? Okay. And that's pretty much it.
In Jamf Protect, will we be seeing a STIG dashboard like you've got for CIS, as was demonstrated today?
I do not know, but boy, that would be awesome, wouldn't it?
It would make my InfoSec team very happy.
I know somebody to talk to see if he would be interested. So,
Thanks for that. So I'm not sure if I fully gathered it, but for the auditing aspect of it, is it tool-based or is it like hand-to-hand combat, like you're doing this manually with professional services and effort? And if it's tool-based, is that something you can do with Jamf Protect as almost like a one-time assessment? Or is that more of a commercial question?
I think I follow the question. Let's see if my coffee is working for me today. So the repos that are out on GitHub, I've had multiple customers either ask for assistance with that, or I've had individuals who've gone out there and implemented themselves. Essentially what you're looking at for both of the STIG and the CIS is that what we're doing is we first bring in all three scripts. There is a script where you set your priorities, the things that we care very, very much about. A script where we do the audit, and a script where we do the remediation. There are 2 extension attributes for CIS, 3 for the STIG. The 2 for CIS are going to report back everything that I failed against as far as the audit, as well as a second extension attribute that is going to come back with a count. Our hope is to get to 0. When I was doing the testing for 1013, a Mac fresh out of the box from Apple came back with against CIS with around 20 things that failed audit. So what we would then do is bring in any of the configuration profiles that fit in with what we were looking to remediate against. Shout out to Mr. Mitchell, Matthew Mitchell, on Monday, who did that presentation about roll your own configuration profiles. Maybe some of the things that we're setting within either the STIG or CIS aren't exactly what we want to have across there. In his presentation, he showed how to change configuration profiles, sign them, bring them into Jamf so that they're able to be deployed without being modified. After I've got those configuration profiles down to those devices, I build a policy that first set what I care about, that very first script. I then do an audit, a remediate, and a second audit, all in one policy. So by the naming and numbering convention of those scripts, ensuring that they run in the appropriate order. And then I push down that policy to my test device. It runs through, comes back and says, here are the 20 things that you failed against. I'm going to audit as much or remediate as much of those as I can, and then audit again and hopefully come back to 0. Some things I can't remediate. For example, disabling system integrity protection. I can't remediate that from a booted state. I have to get back to the recovery partition to fix that. So if you've got that turned off, that's something we're going to have to lay hands on. But typically, you should come back to a point of 0.
Okay,
Did that explain it?
It does. Thank you very much. But also, is it reasonable to just audit like just a few devices in a large-scale environment, or are you need to be a little bit more broader than that typically?
I absolutely recommend, if we're looking at putting this in your environment, start small. Find a team that is absolutely fine with this happening to them. It's probably going to be InfoSec. It might be your own IT staff who say that this is absolutely fine to do. Find out where we're at, remediate. Then when we get to the point where we're going to be releasing this wider, start auditing first. Don't do the remediation immediately. Find out where we're at. Once we've gotten to that point, then have the conversation with all of our team members saying, this is what's changing, and then do the remediation.
Hey, thanks for this. So my question is not really necessarily about Macs, it's more organizational. So I work in an unregulated industry, and we talk to InfoSec and stuff like that, what frameworks we want to adopt, what the end goal is, and realistically, in the past, it's been ISO, it's been SOC, usually driven by sales more than anything, or if we're going to go public, Starbucks, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts if I'm going to do, let's say, like an initial gap assessment in our organization? Should I just be focusing on, you know what, we're going to do SOC 2, let's just do all the SOC 2 stuff and get it over with, or should we be looking at it more holistically, like a CIS or a NIST framework?
The reason why I'm making this face is that I feel like the answer is going to be, it depends. So
I know, I just kind of wanted your opinion.
Absolutely. I feel like our most success is to, if there is nothing completely set in place, start small and work our way up. If we immediately close the gate down, that's going to be jarring for a lot of organizations.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks so much. Do you have any tips for handling maybe exceptions or accommodations for development environments that can't necessarily apply this full time?
Absolutely. So if we're going to pick on development, which we should not, what I would recommend is having separate versions of that, setting our benchmarks, so that I've got one for the organization almost en masse and one for my exceptions, so that I can then run those other two scripts against there and determine what do they fail against and what do we need to remediate against.
Any other questions up here?
Morning, everybody. So more of a statement. So about a third of the STIG, about a third of the CIS benchmarks are handled by configuration profiles, which Aaron was talking about. So anybody that has an AppleCare OS support agreement or has an Apple sales team, please let them know any rules or settings that you want to get, moved from a script to a configuration profile. Get that up, get that going through the Apple process, a radar, or an AppleCare OS support ticket. We want to get all those things as much as possible to configuration profiles.
I have a two-part question. There's an item in the CIS for sudo or timeout. And first question is, does it make any sense at all to set it to 0, where a user gets annoyed and just elevates himself permanently to root? And number two is, how do you swap out a file that manages whether or not you can sudo? Or do you just set and off the setting?
So thinking about the setting it to 0, I've seen plenty of organizations do that. I've seen ones who just go back down to the timeout. It really just depends on the setting of the expectation for the user. Are they aware that this is going to happen? Otherwise, if they don't know that that's going to happen, they might go out on their own to try and find a way to fix it. In regards to the second question, I do not have the answer for that, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
So just to add a statement onto the configuration profiles, as the gentleman recommended, the one reason I really like this project is because configuration profiles do not actually reapply in most instances. So you can typically, if you have admin credentials, revert a setting and it may not always reapply from a config profile. So that's why I've always really liked this project as I followed it, because it kind of ensures some of those settings, if reverted, would revert back. So just keep that in mind as well. Configuration profiles aren't perfect. Yeah. So that's it.
Hey, I've done the CIS remediations a couple times now, and every year I wish that there was like a Delta version of them that I could say, okay, I did them for the last OS, the OS before that. Do you know if there's any push towards getting to that point? Because I noticed that a lot of them actually do work year after year. Of course, there's obviously some that change, but I would love to see that.
That's a really good thought. I don't know if there is any plan in regards to that. Definitely could be on the roadmap, though.
Morning, Aaron.
Morning.
One of the things that happens with the CIS remediation scripts is we get in a scenario where it's highly dependent on how often you're updating inventory. What are your thoughts as far as, there are times when you could be updating your inventory too frequently and that can cause some problems. Where do you tend to dial it in for most of the organizations that you go on site to deal with or deal with remotely?
That's a really good question. That harkens back to one of my bigger challenges, which is how are we scaling? So if I've worked with places that have said, I'm absolutely fine getting this information once every week. What are the odds that things are going to change over a week? I've worked with organizations like every time they check in, I need to know where we are. So the CIS benchmarks that contain the configuration profiles have two scripts inside of them for the remediation. There is one that is labeled original, and there's one that's labeled as API. The API one, what it's doing is you're not adding a update of inventory to that policy. We're using the API to update those two extension attributes so that we're not getting all of the full inventory every time. We're just getting the things that we care about right then in that moment. So if you're an organization that needs to have this heartbeat, that would be the way I would lean. Otherwise, think about determining what is the likelihood that these things are going to skew this much? That are we going to see a change in a day, in a week?
Any other questions, comments? All right. Hearing none, we'll close out. Thank you, Aaron.